Hey guys, tonight we drift back into candlelit halls and darkened royal nurseries, where a newborn baby boy is cradled not with joy, but with unease. The year is 1661, and you're deep inside the Escorial Palace outside Madrid. The air is thick with incense and whispers, and somewhere, a midwife clutches her apron a little tighter. You hear the baby cry, but there's something in that cry that doesn't quite sound right. Not sick, not screaming, just off. And as the baby is handed to his royal mother, the queen, she hesitates. Not from lack of love, it's from fear. This baby, you quickly realize, is not your average royal bundle. His tongue is too large for his mouth. His limbs bend in strange ways. He cannot feed without choking. His eyes never seem to meet yours. Everyone around you pretends not to notice, as if decorum might rewrite reality, but deep down, they all see it. And you do too, you dear traveler, are witnessing the arrival of Charles II of Spain, a monarch, so physically and mentally fragile that even his own people believed he was bewitched. And honestly, you probably won't survive this journey through his life with your comfort intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere interesting, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun to see who else can't sleep. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing beside the cradle, watching as a line of nobles file in to look upon their future king. They smile politely, nodding at the queen, but their eyes betray them. Something's wrong. You notice how the nursemaid keeps wiping drool from the baby's chin? How the priest mumbles an extra prayer during the baptism? The way even the king, Philip IV, looks down and quickly looks away. Charles, too, from day one, seems to exist between two worlds, royalty and ruin. You wander through the halls as he grows, just a few months old, and already there are rumors. Midwives whisper about ancient sins. Court astrologers look troubled. A goat is slaughtered quietly beneath the palace to ward off dark forces. And while none of this makes it to the official records, it pulses beneath everything like a heartbeat too quiet to name. Physicians, some of the best in Europe, are summoned. They poke and prod. The child is late to sit, late to crawl. He cannot speak properly, and when he tries, his words are gurgled. His head seems too large, his limbs weak, his jaw unhinged. Literally. A condition later called mandibular prognathism, more famously, the Habsburg jaw. You trace his lineage and it feels like déjà vu. His mother and father are uncle and niece. Let that sink in. His grandmother is also his aunt. His family tree is a circle drawn in crayon. You don't need a genetics degree to guess where this is going. But at the time, they blame everything except the obvious: sorcery, sin, the wrath of God. In fact, a popular fringe belief at the time insists that a demon has taken root in the child's spine. One servant swears she saw his shadow moving before him. Another claims that his cradle once levitated an inch off the ground. Are they mad? Superstitious? Just terrified of naming the truth? Historians still argue whether Charles' deformities were purely the result of inbreeding or compounded by untreated illness. But as you look at him, small, pale, slumped, you don't need a historian. You just need your eyes. As the years tick forward, Charles continues to survive somehow. The doctors are baffled. The priests are nervous. The people grow quiet. Their prince is clearly not well, but he is their prince. In Spain, for all its grandeur, is not in a position to replace him. You watch his mother, Mariana of Austria, tighten her grip on the reins of power. She becomes his voice, his strength, his everything. But not out of maternal warmth, out of political necessity. She knows he is weak. She also knows that makes him useful. In his earliest portraits, Charles is painted like a doll, propped up in lavish outfits, surrounded by opulence. But the artist has to soften his features, hide the slack jaw, the blank stare. You look closely, though. The truth seeps through the canvas. You can almost hear him wheezing through the paint. He survives a bout of measles. Then smallpox. Then some mystery illness that leaves him bedridden for weeks. At one point, the palace even brings in a Flemish woman rumored to be a healer. She waves herbs over him. He doesn't get better. But oddly enough, no one else gets sick. They consider it a win. Late one night, you find yourself in his nursery again. A cold draft slips through the window. You hear the boy breathing labored and heavy, and suddenly he sits up, eyes wide, staring straight ahead. He sees things. A nurse whispers behind you, things he shouldn't. But that, dear listener, is a whisper for later. For now, you leave him resting, twisted in his silks and wool, under the weight of a crown he hasn't even worn yet. You slip out of the nursery and into the corridors of royal blood, quite literally. The walls are lined with portraits of kings and queens, each one staring down with hollow eyes and sharp chins. You run your fingers along a tapestry that maps out the proud lineage of the Habsburgs. It doesn't take long to notice something strange. You see the same faces, the same names, repeated like a glitch in the system. Welcome to the most powerful family in Europe and possibly the most genetically doomed. The Habsburgs weren't just rich, they were obsessed with keeping their bloodline pure. Cousin married cousin, uncle married niece, over and over again, until the family tree had fewer branches than a broomstick. You pause before one noble face, in particular Joanna of Castile, known as Joanna the Mad. Her eyes are wild, unblinking. She's Charles II's great-great-grandmother, his great-great-great-great-mother, too. That's not a typo, it's math, royal style. As you dig deeper, it becomes clear that Charles' birth wasn't just unlucky. It was inevitable. By the time he was born, generations of Habsburg inbreeding had baked a genetic casserole no one could digest. Historians still argue whether the dynasty truly understood the cost, or if their desire for political unity blinded them to science. But let's be honest, science wasn't exactly trending in 17th century Spain. Superstition had the main stage. And so, with every generation, the Habsburg jaw grew longer. The skulls grew more misshapen, infertility increased. Etched into this crumbling lineage, Charles II was born a living monument to 1,000 bad decisions, sealed with a royal kiss. You walk now through the palace's hidden records, old letters, medical notes, spiritual evaluations. One physician noted Charles had only one functioning testicle. Another whispered that he didn't T-speak until the age of 4 and could unwalk properly until age 8. But of course, none of this could be said out loud. That would be treason. So instead, they made excuses. He was delicate, pious, a thinker who once stared at a candle for 3 straight hours without blinking. Make of that what you will. Your footfalls echo through the cold stone halls as you follow the Queen Mother's footsteps. Mariana of Austria knew something had gone terribly wrong, and yet she doubled down. She brought in more holy relics, had more masses said. She leaned on astrologers. One even told her Charles was the chosen one, who would defeat the Protestants. Spoiler alert, he did not. But here's a twist. Spanish people in a strange way loved him, or at least pitied him. To them, he was less of a man and more of a symbol, a sacred victim bearing the burden of a sinful empire. Some said he suffered for the people's sins. Others thought his suffering proved divine favor. You lean against the frescoed walls and listen to court gossip. Some courtiers whisper that Charles was bewitched by witches from France, sent to rot Spain from the inside. Others claim his soul had never fully entered his body. And in one particularly bizarre fringe tale, a courtier insists that Charles wasn't human at all, but a changeling swapped at birth by forest spirits. But you know better. You've seen the bloodlines. You've seen the portraits. Charles was no changeling. He was a Habsburg, through and through. As the boy reaches adolescence, you watch him try to grow into his role. But the body won't cooperate. His jaw barely lets him chew. His limbs are too weak for a sword. And every time he attempts a public appearance, the court holds its breath. Now, will he faint again? Will he mumble nonsense? Will the people notice? Yet in portraits, he still wears the robe, the crown, the polished shoes, the mannequin king propped up on centuries of lies. You notice the weight of those lies most when he tries to smile. It's a haunting thing. The famous Habsburg smile, all jaw, no joy. It curls sideways like a broken mask, and you realize he never stood a chance. One night, you find yourself back at the family altar. Dozens of candles burn low. flickering shadows across ancient bones said to belong to saints. Charles kneels before them, trembling. Not in awe, in desperation. He's been told his illness is not of the body but of the soul, that perhaps, somewhere in the bloodline, a pact was made. That maybe someone in his family gave something dark in exchange for power, and now he's paying the price. Is it true? Who knows? Historians still debate whether Charles Court sincerely believed he was cursed or if it was just another coping mechanism for an empire on the brink of collapse. Either way, he believed it, and maybe, standing there beside him, you do too. As the candles burn lower and the wind howls outside the palace walls, you get the sinking feeling that you're not just witnessing history. You're watching it unravel. You walk beside him now, a young man, or something close to it. Charles, too, is entering what should be the pride of youth, but instead, you find yourself staring at a boy still trapped inside a body that betrays him. His face is the first thing you notice. That jaw again, like two mismatched puzzle pieces shoved together, juts so far forward that his lips can't close properly. His tongue, too large for his mouth, always seems to be in the way of speaking, of breathing, of swallowing. You watch him try to eat, and it's a slow, soggy ordeal that ends with more food on the floor than in his stomach. But here's the thing. He's the king of Spain now. His father, Philip IV, is dead. And Charles, at just 4 years old, was declared monarch. Now, in his teens, he's expected to act like one. You follow him through the stiff corridors of court life. He's dressed in heavy silks, silver-threaded waistcoats, thick collars that itch against his pale neck. His eyes dart nervously. He doesn't walk so much a shuffle. He stands still, his head tilts ever so slightly, as if the weight of his skull pulls him sideways. And when he does speak, it's in a thick, slurred voice, difficult to understand, even for those who desperately want to. And yet, they dress him up like a doll, like a symbol of Habsburg power, even though he is its most tragic casualty. His portraits from this era are honestly a bit heartbreaking. The court painters try. They smooth out his features, angle his face just so. But still, there's no hiding it. The skin is too pale, the eyes too sunken. That signature lower lip juts like a shelf. At state dinners, you sit beside him as foreign ambassadors struggle to maintain their politeness. They bow, they smile, but you can see the discomfort in their eyes. One French envoy reportedly referred to him in a private letter as more a corpse than a king. Cold, definitely wrong. Sadly, not really. The Spanish court begins to split those who want to protect the king and those who want to control him. You watch power flow, not through Charles, but around him. His mother, still the regent in all but name, guards him fiercely. She limits his exposure, cancels public appearances when he's too weak to stand, and surrounds him with sycophants and clergy who speak of divine will, not genetic reality. But rumors persist. He is too strange, too sickly, bewitched, maybe. Some say the Queen Mother herself cursed him to keep power. Others believe the French slipped sorcery into his food. Few whisper that he was born without a soul altogether, that his body is just a puppet occupied by ancestral sin. Historians still argue whether the talk of witchcraft was genuinely believed or simply political theater. In a deeply Catholic Spain, physical deformity was often seen as a sign of divine punishment or demonic interference. And when no doctor can offer an explanation, well, demons make a convenient plan B as Charles begins to rule, which mostly involves nodding through decisions others make. He becomes increasingly isolated. He rarely leaves the palace. His health remains fragile. He suffers from frequent fevers, mysterious nosebleeds, and digestive issues that keep him bedridden for days. He has no real friends, no hobbies, no intellectual interests. One courtier observed that the king does not know what a state is, nor what business is. Ouch. Still, the court puts on a brave face. You attend an elaborate birthday celebration in the gardens. Fireworks burst overhead. A marching band parades through the hedges. Charles is wheeled out in a decorative chair, face blank, arms limp. He waves sort of, the people cheer. But you can feel the performance sag at the edges. Everyone knows. They just won't say it. And through it all, Charles hears the whispers, as you can see it in his eyes. The paranoia, the pain. He's not stupid, just broken. He knows people doubt him. He knows his body is a theater of pity. And worst of all, he knows he has no heir, no future. One particularly strange moment sticks with you. It's a warm evening. Charles is walking in the garden well, being half-dragged, half-guided by servants when he suddenly stops and points to a statue of a saint. He stares at it for a long time, then mutters something under his breath. You lean closer. He's waiting, Charles says. For what? A servant asks. Charles only shrugs. To replace me. You blink. Was that prophecy, delusion, or just a rare flash of clarity? Either way, the air gets colder after that. In the palace chapel, incense swirls like mist. Charles kneels and mumbles prayers he barely understands. The priests hover nervously. One quietly begins an exorcism not on Charles himself, but on the palace. Just in case. Because, it might be haunted. Or maybe cursed. It's hard to say when your king looks like a ghost and acts like a puppet. And then there's the fringe stuff. An Italian court magician claims he can draw the evil spirits out of Charles using magnets and powdered unicorn horn. A nun from a villa insists. She had visions of Charles being carried through fire by angels. One noblewoman claims she saw his reflection move independently in a mirror. Is any of it true? Probably not. But honestly, at this point, would it surprise you? Now you're seated in a dim stone study, candles flickering weakly against the late afternoon gloom. Charles is slumped in a chair, barely upright, his tongue lolling slightly from the corner of his mouth. In front of him is a stack of books, but not for pleasure. These are lesson books, scripture, dynastic histories, and etiquette guides. And you quickly realize something. This isn't education. It's damage control. His tutors, mostly aging monks and loyal clergymen, pace nervously as they read aloud. You watch them ask Charles a question. Something simple, like what is the capital of France? And wait through an unbearable silence as he fumbles the words. Par, ... pan, ... Paris. He tries, his voice so soft and mushy it sounds like a whisper through soup. The monk nods, relieved. That's about as good as it gets. Charles, now in his late teens, is technically capable of reading and writing. Barely, but his mind, much like his body, moves slowly and unevenly. He forgets what he's told within hours, confuses people's names. One tutor confides that the king once asked if he was his own grandfather. It's not clear if it was a joke. Probably not. Historians still debate how much of Charles's intellectual delay was due to congenital issues versus sheer neglect. He wasn't just born into a failing body, he was raised inside a lie. The court didn't want to teach him. They wanted to protect him. Or rather, they wanted to protect the illusion of his authority. You watch his days unfold like a tragic loop. He wakes late, attends mass, receives heavily filtered reports on state affairs he doesn't understand. Then studies, though that word feels generous. Often he stares blankly out the window as tutors drone on, his mind clearly elsewhere. Or nowhere at all. There's no real conversation, just repetition. And maybe you've noticed repetition is the unofficial anthem of Habsburg Spain. Repeated names, repeated marriages, repeated mistakes. You accompany Charles to a private lesson in diplomacy. A court advisor slowly reads aloud a letter from the Holy Roman Emperor, and Charles tries to listen. But halfway through, his eyes glaze over, and he suddenly asks if the emperor has horses. Everyone pauses. The question doesn't make sense. It doesn't connect. But the advisor smiles, nods politely, and answers it anyway. That's how everyone treats him, as if he's a fragile chandelier beautiful from a distance, useless up close, and liable to shatter if touched. Behind closed doors, though, they mock him. You hear it. You sit in antechambers as nobles make jokes about his Jonas, or chuckle that Spain is ruled by a puppet king whose strings are tangled. One courtier mimics his slurred speech during a drunken feast. Another places a wooden spoon in his own mouth to fake the famous Habsburg underbite. But you know what's worse than cruelty? Pity. And Charles is surrounded by it. During a public religious procession, you walk beside him as he's paraded through the streets of Madrid. The crowd cheers half-heartedly. He tries to wave, but his arm trembles and drops before it gets above his shoulder. Someone tosses a rose toward his carriage, and it lands on his lap. He doesn't even notice. His eyes are locked on the sky. He's blessed, an old woman beside you whispers. God must love him to make him suffer like that. Maybe she believes it. Maybe everyone does. But you can't shake the feeling that this isn't faith. It's resignation. Charles isn't alone in this hollow education. The entire empire is in denial. Spain, once the most powerful kingdom in the world, is now floundering. Its navy weakened, its treasury emptied by endless wars, its colonies straining under poor management and rebellion. And at the center of it all sits a boy king, who still struggles to remember the names of his ministers. You find his private notes more drawings than words, scribbled saints, smiley faces. One page has his own name written over and over, as if he's trying to remember who he is. But here's the haunting part. He tries. You see it in rare flashes of clarity. He wants to be a good king. He wants to please his mother, his court, his God. He just can't. There's a moment one evening when you walk in on him alone, no attendants, just Charles in the dying light. He's holding a small mirror, studying himself. Thud. His head tilts slightly. He pulls his lips in, then out, then in, again, trying to force a smile, or maybe just trying to understand what he looks like. Then he drops the mirror and sighs, a long, tired sound. Like an old man who's lived too long. You don't know how much he understands, but you know this much: he knows he is broken. And he knows he cannot fix himself. There is a fringe court story you hear about a secret ceremonia, cleansing meant to remove the curse believed to haunt him. It involves 7 candles, the skull of a martyred child, and something called the milk of a white mare. No one knows if it really happened, but someone claims to have seen Charles after, weeping silently into his sleeve. Was it grief, shame, relief? Who knows? No one ever asks him. Because what can you ask a king who can't be taught, can't be touched, and most dangerously of all, can't be replaced? You trail behind him now as he shuffles through the shadowy grandeur of the palace, barely 17, but already moving like a man twice his age. The stiff joints, the dragging foot, the persistent drool he keeps trying and failing to wipe with his sleeve. And yet every servant, every advisor, every bishop still bows, because he is no longer just Charles. He is King Charles II of Spain. And you can't help but think, what a tragic kind of royalty, to be crowned with responsibility, but given none of the tools to carry it. Every morning, he's dressed in layers of velvet and lace, stiff collars that rub against skin too soft, too pale. He's walked to his throne room like a marionette, where he sits for hours, blank-eyed, listening to petitions he doesn't understand. Ministers speak, nobles argue, the economy crumbles in real time. Man Charles simply nods. Maybe, if he's awake, it's here. During these ceremonial appearances that you truly see it. He's a relic. A symbol of a Spain that still wants to pretend it rules the world. Like a statue dragged into battle. He doesn't rule, he is ruled. By the Council of State, by his mother, by factions in court who manipulate his every nod like it's divine will. There's one painful moment that stays with you. A noble presents him with a silver coin minted with his face. Charles holds it up to the light, squinting, then asks, "Is this really me?" He's not being philosophical. He genuinely isn't sure. You might think that with power this hollow, the court would show mercy, but politics doesn't work that way. Behind his back, factions form. The Queen Mother's enemies stir rebellion, whispering that Charles is unfit. One pamphlet circulated secretly among nobles calls him a living corpse wearing a crown. Another claims his deformity is a punishment for Spain's past sins. Historians still argue whether Mariana of Austria held the kingdom together out of maternal love or sheer political ambition. The way she knows that Charles is fragile and that fragility is her leverage. You begin to notice how little he speaks during council meetings, how often he defers, looks to his mother or the archbishop, or simply sits in silence. When he does speak, it's often unrelated or incoherent. During one court session about military spending, he reportedly asked if the soldiers had enough lace on their boots. The court smiled politely. The money was approved anyway, but Charles wants to be involved. That's the tragedy. You find him scribbling notes in his shaky hand, trying to keep up. Once, during a walk through the gardens, he stops beside you and says, "They talk too fast. I try, but the words, they run away." Still, the kingdom demands ceremony, so you stand beside him at royal events, coronations, feast days, processions through Madrid. They roll him out in ornate carriages, place heavy robes on his shoulders, position his hand just right so it can give the faintest wave. The people cheer. Some mean it. Others don't, but all of them see the same thing. A boy in a man's costume, a puppet, propped up by tradition and prayers. And if Charles ever resents this, he hides it well. Or maybe he's simply never known anything different. One fringe tale you overhear in the kitchens is that Charles once wandered into the library at night and sat there for hours staring at a globe, spinning it slowly with one finger. When a servant asked what he was doing, he replied, "Looking for where I belong." At night, his health worsens. You hear him coughing through the stone walls, struggling to sleep, plagued by nosebleeds and indigestion. His doctors try everything: purges, bleeding, aromatic herbs, even powdered emeralds. Nothing helps. One physician writes that the king's stomach is a dark cavern where food goes to rot. Charming, you watch him age without strength, without confidence, without peace. His eyes grow more sunken. His skin turns waxy. At 20, he looks 40. At 25, he looks like a shadow. He's often too weak to ride, too ill to stand through mass, and when a French diplomat sees him for the first time, sends a letter home, describing Charles as a living skeleton with the mind of a child. Might think by now that the court would lower its expectations, but no, the pressure only grows. He must marry, must produce an heir. Because that's the one thing Charles II, for all his frailty, must do. Otherwise the Spanish crown will die with him. And so begins the next chapter of his lonely reign. Suitors are considered, bloodlines are measured, a bride is chosen. But as you will see soon enough, even that is not a salvation. For now, Charles sits in the cold throne room, hands folded in his lap. Watching the rain streak down the stained glass windows, you lean in to hear his voice barely audible. Do you think, he asks, God forgot me? And you, dear traveler, don't have an answer? You're standing in the vaulted royal chapel now, surrounded by incense so thick it clings to your lungs. Tapestries ripple in the candlelight. Choir voices echo against stone. But your eyes aren't on the altar. They're on Charles dressed in gold and white, stiff-backed, trembling, slightly waiting for his bride. The time has come. King must marry. It's not for love. No one even pretends that. It's for legacy, for politics, for the desperate hope that this frail man might produce a miracle, a healthy heir. And so, enter Marie-Louise of a French princess, sweet-faced 17, and about to walk into the most suffocating role in Europe. You stand beside her as she steps into the chapel for the first time. Her face is composed, regal, until she sees Charles. Her mask falters just a second. Because it's one thing to hear about the Spanish king's deformities, his slow speech, his pale, sickly features. It's another to face them, to be betrothed to them. Charles tries to smile, comes out as a grimace. Still, the ceremony proceeds. Holy vows, the ring, the awkward kiss. Spain rejoices. France cautiously celebrates. And you, watching from the choir loft, can't help but think, this is less a wedding than an exorcism with flowers. At the feast that follows, Charles sits stiffly at the head table. He barely touches the food. You hear him murmur to a servant, "Is she happy?" The servant doesn't answer. Probably because the answer is no. Marie-Louise, to her credit, tries. She speaks to Charles gently. She attends masses with him. She writes home that he is sweet and obliging, but also that he looks more dead than alive. Their nights together are awkward and short and very, very quiet. Soon, the whispers begin. There's no pregnancy, not after 1 month, or 6, or 12. The court grows anxious. Charles is examined again by physicians. They assure the Queen Mother that yes, everything is technically there, but privately, some express doubts. One report notes Charles's underdeveloped parts. Another describes a possible deformity of the urethra. A more cutting rumor simply says, the seed does not stir. Marie-Louise begins to withdraw. She stops writing as often. She walks alone in the gardens. She avoids meals with Charles when she can. And when he does approach her, it's often with the awkwardness of a boy trying to play the part of a man. He brings her small gifts, carved crucifixes, embroidered gloves, a tiny portrait of himself that she politely sets aside. One night, you stand in the hallway outside her chambers and hear muffled crying. Is it grief? Frustration? Dread? Maybe all three? To keep suspicion at bay, the court blames witchcraft. Again, some claim that an evil spell is preventing consummation. Others say Marie-Louise is cursed, not Charles. A few whispered that French witches sent her barren on purpose to destroy Spain from the inside. And that's when things get weird. You sit in on a secret meeting Charles, his mother, and a cluster of priests and exorcists. They bring in a nun rumored to have visions. She touches Charles's chest and declares that a demon is blocking his seed. A priest nods solemnly. Plans are made for a spiritual cleansing. In the dark of the royal chapel, you watch them perform it. Candles in a circle, Latin murmurs. Charles kneels shirtless, shaking. Holy water sizzles as it hits his skin. The nun shrieks, claiming the devil has taken root in his loins. Charles just blinks, unsure if this is medicine or madness. Historians still debate whether these exorcisms were purely symbolic or sincerely believed. But to Charles, it's real. His body is a battlefield. He doesn't know who or what is winning. Marie-Louise grows thinner, staider. A French courtier writes that she has the look of a widow before her husband is dead. She begins complaining of stomach pains. She eats less and less. Some say she's been poisoned. Others say she's poisoning herself. But there's no proof. Just shadows. In one of her final letters, she writes, "I am alone here, completely alone." And then, in 1689, at just 26 years old, Marie-Louise dies. You're there as the bells toll. Charles collapses beside her coffin. He sobs so loudly the servants step back. Whether he loved her or just clung to her out of fear, you can't be sure. But the grief is real, gutting, animal. One fringe report claims Charles locked himself in her chambers for hours, talking to her spirit. Another says he ordered all of her clothing to be burned, fearing they still held traces of the curse. And just like that, the hope for an heir dies with her. But Spain is not done with Charles, not yet. Within months, they push him toward another bride, because failure in a royal womb always falls on the woman. You're standing now in the pale dawn light of Madrid, as the bells ring not for mourning, but for yet another wedding. Just 1 year after burying Marie-Louise, Charles II is preparing to marry Maria Anna of Neuburg, a Bavarian princess from a family renowned for its fertility. Or so they say. Her sister had 23 children, which apparently made her uterus a diplomatic asset. Spain is betting everything on that lucky streak. You watch Maria Anna arrive at court, pale and composed, her gown layered like armor. She's no naive girl like Marie-Louise. She's sharp, politically aware, and fully briefed on her new husband's condition. In fact, her family insisted on generous financial guarantees, in case things didn't go well. A smart move, honestly. Charles greets her with trembling hands and a face that tries for a smile, but lands somewhere between pain and confusion. He bows to low, stumbles, then stares at her for an awkward 5 seconds before muttering something about the color of her dress. You can feel her shoulders stiffen as she nods politely. They are married in a flurry of incense and protocol. You stand near the altar again, watching the pageantry play out like a puppet show. You can almost hear the entire court silently praying. Please, let this one work. But it doesn't. Within weeks, Maria Anna begins sending letters back to her family describing the hopelessness of her situation. The king, she writes, is more ghost than man. She describes how he trembles constantly, how he cannot walk without assistance, and how he falls asleep mid-conversation. She adds that attempts to consummate the marriage have been spiritually challenging, a diplomatic way of saying not happening. You watch Charles try. He fasts. He prays. He visits shrines. His doctors order more purgatives, more bloodletting. One even recommends bathing in bull's blood to restore his virility. He tries it. Spoiler, it doesn't work. Fringe remedies flood the palace. One Jesuit recommends powdered beetles. Another says burying a piece of his clothing at midnight in a crossroads might lift the spell. A mystic swears that bathing with a red-haired virgin will strengthen his male energies. No word on whether they found one. Meanwhile, Charles is deteriorating. His body begins to collapse inward. His hair falls out in clumps. His skin yellows. His legs swell. He can barely eat, and when he does, he often vomits it up. His breath smells faintly of rot. A royal doctor records that Charles's urine was thick and black, like tar, and still no air. Maria Anna, far from being a silent victim, begins playing the political game. She tightens her grip over court appointments, dismisses servants loyal to the Queen Mother, and surrounds herself with German advisors. Charles, too weak to resist, just nods through it all. You see him gazing at her sometimes with a kind of dumbfounded affection. He doesn't realize she's positioning herself not just as queen but as regent in waiting. Historians still debate whether Maria Anna truly cared for Charles or simply endeared him as part of a larger strategy. But one thing's certain by now, the idea of an heir is gone. The question shifts from when will he produce one, to what happens when he dies, because Europe is watching. France eyes the Spanish throne with a greedy smile. Austria sharpens its political knives. England and the Dutch Republic whisper about balance and treaties. You can feel the temperature rising because when Charles dies, Spain doesn't just lose a king, it risks losing everything. You attend one council meeting where the succession is discussed in hushed tones. Charles sits slumped in his chair, eyes unfocused, while men debate his death as if he isn't even there. At one point, he mutters, "I can hear you." But they keep talking. Maria Anna insists her husband is under demonic influence. She brings in exorcists again. One declares that 7 demons live inside him, each tied to a cardinal sin. You attend the ritual, the incense, the Latin chants, the holy relics pressed to his chest. Charles sobs, not from fear, from exhaustion. There is a particularly grim report from a physician around this time that describes Charles's body as so wasted and shrunken that he resembles a walking corpse. Another says his bones are soft, like wax warmed by the sun, and yet he lingers. A French ambassador writes, "He does not live, but he does not die either." Just ... continues. Some nights you find Charles wandering the halls. Alone, silent. He touches the walls as if they might speak to him. One evening he stops, turns to a servant, and asks, "Am I dead yet?" The servant doesn't know what to say, neither do you. Because this is no longer the reign of Charles II. It's the afterlife of a dynasty. The Habsburg name, once thunderous across Europe, is now reduced to a whisper in a dark palace. And though the king is still breathing, the empire is already mourning him. You wake to the sound of bells again, but this time they're not marking a wedding or a feast. They toll slowly, solemnly counting down. Oh. You follow the echoes through the palace, past servants whispering with their heads bowed, courtiers moving like ghosts, doctors huddling in corners. Something has shifted. Everyone knows it. Charles II is dying. Not metaphorically, not in whispers, not in the slow, tragic way he's always been dying. This is it, the end game. You're summoned to his chamber, and the first thing that hits you is the smell, not rot, not disease. Something sweeter, like rotting fruit. It clings to the heavy curtains and tapestries. His bed is massive, draped in red and gold, but Charles barely takes up half of it. He lies curled, limbs frail and yellowing, skin stretched over bone. His jaw, still protruding, seems heavier than ever, his mouth partially open, too tired to close. The doctors have no idea what to do anymore. They prescribe rest, broths, bleeding, leeches. At one point, someone suggests powdered mummy. That's right, ground-up Egyptian corpses, a fringe remedy bizarrely common in Europe at the time. It doesn't help. Every day now, someone else is brought in to pray over him. Priests, nuns, relic bearers. One man brings a vial of holy water said to come from. Another carries what's supposedly St. Peter's finger bone. None of it works. Charles drifts in and out of fever dreams, speaking nonsense, clinging to crucifixes with a death grip. You sit by his bedside as he mutters about his ancestors. "Don Carlos," he whispers, eyes wide. "He's watching me." That would be his uncle who went mad, starved himself, and died young. His ghost must be very busy these days. Sometimes Charles cries for his mother. Sometimes he cries for God. Sometimes he just cries. At one point, Maria Anna enters, stiff as stone. She kneels beside him. He reaches for her hand, but she flinches slightly before taking it. She tells him he's strong, that God loves him, that Spain loves him. He closes his eyes and whispers, "But I've given them nothing." It's not true, of course. He's given them a century's worth of cautionary tale, a living symbol of empire, inbreeding, denial, and decay. But you don't say that. No one does. Instead, the court starts planning for what comes after. That's when the succession crisis explodes. You attend secret councils now, held in locked rooms by candlelight. Spain's empire is still vast, still influential as a prize too great to fall into the wrong hands. But there's no clear heir. Charles has no children, no siblings. And the nearest claimants are from rival dynasties. France wants the Bourbon grandson of Louis XIV on the throne. Austria wants their Habsburg Archduke to take over. England and the Dutch Republic want balance. Everyone else wants whatever keeps them out of war. Historians still argue whether Charles ever understood the scale of the storm building around him. But just when you think he's completely gone, he surprises everyone. One evening, he calls a private meeting. It's just a few ministers. His voice is weak, but he speaks clearly. He declares that his successor will be Philip of Anjou, the Bourbon grandson of Louis XIV. He wants peace, stability, a future for Spain. It's a bold move, and a controversial one, because it essentially hands Spain to France. It terrifies the rest of Europe. You feel the palace begin to split. Some courtiers are thrilled. Others are furious. One ambassador reportedly faints when he hears the news. Another storms out and immediately sends a coded message back to Vienna. The War of Spanish Succession is no longer a possibility. It's a certainty. But Charles doesn't care. He's done. His breath rattles louder with each day. His skin turns a grayish hue. He can no longer sit up. He barely eats. A physician writes that he is hollowed out from the inside, like an apple left too long in the sun. One night you're alone in the chamber. The candles have burned low. Everyone's gone. It's just you, the silence, and Charles. His eyes flutter open, turns his head just slightly and looks at you. And then, in a voice so soft it's almost not there, he asks, "Was I ever really a king?" You try to answer, but what could you possibly say? The next morning, November 1st, 1700, the King of Spain dies. No thunder, no royal fanfare. Just a frail body going still beneath velvet sheets. He was 38 years old. When his doctors perform the autopsy, they're stunned. His heart is the size of a walnut. His lungs are black. His intestines are rotted. His head is full of fluid. One physician simply writes, "His body contained nothing that could be called life." And that, dear listener, is how the last Habsburg king of Spain exits the world bewitched, broken, and utterly alone. But the chaos he leaves behind? Oh, that's just beginning. You'd think the story ends, their king dies. Curtain falls, but you know better by now. In truth, Charles II's death is just the prelude to an epic disaster, the likes of which Europe hasn't seen in generations. Because now that the frail king is gone, everyone wants a piece of his empire.
Oh.
The ink on his will isn't even dry before the fighting begins. The Bourbon grandson of Louis XIV, Philip of Anjou, claims the throne, exactly as Charles wished. But Austria calls foul, insisting the Spanish crown belongs to a Habsburg. England and the Dutch panic, imagining a united France and Spain under one family, dominating the continent. The balance of power is teetering on the edge of a sword. And so, with Charles barely in the ground, Europe descends into chaos. You are now standing at the start of the War of Spanish Succession. A 12-year nightmare that will cost hundreds of thousands of lives and reshape the map of Europe, all because one man couldn't produce an heir. Or more truthfully, because generations of his ancestors ignored the basic laws of biology and common sense. The irony? Charles II, who could barely speak in full sentences, just lit the fuse to one of the bloodiest wars in early modern history. Historians still debate whether his final decision was his own or pushed by French influence. Some argue he had a brief moment of clarity. Others believe Maria, Anna, and her allies had been outmaneuvered, and the French simply won the game. Either way, Spain was now a powder keg. Meanwhile, back in Madrid, the court is in shambles. The Queen, Dowager, Maria Anna, is pushed aside. Her allies flee or are arrested. Pro-French faction takes over. Charles's tapestries are removed from the palace. His portraits quietly disappear from certain halls. His death isn't mourned for long, it's politically inconvenient. He's not remembered as a martyr, he's remembered as a problem. Even his burial is subdued. You're there as they lower his body into the royal crypt, beneath the monastery of El Escorial, the grand Habsburg mausoleum. The monks chant. The candles flicker. And then the stone lid slides into place. No great epics are recited, no nation-shaking eulogy. It's just one fragile man disappearing into a granite box alongside centuries of ancestors who doomed him before he was born. But Charles doesn't go quietly. The shadow lingers. The people, many of whom pitied him, begin to whisper about his soul. Some believe he's still suffering, trapped between worlds. One legend claims his spirit walks the halls of El Escorial on stormy nights, jaw clenched, muttering Latin prayers. Another says his ghost appears in mirrors, a warning to those who chase power without wisdom. And then there's the darker version. One fringe tale, whispered by palace servants, suggests Charles was never buried at all. That his body was so unusual, so unnatural, it was secretly taken to the Royal Medical College for study. Preserved, dissected, hidden. There's no proof, just eerie silence and too many locked doors. And as Europe tears itself apart, France and Austria clashing, England invading Spain, cities burning, no one talks about the boy king anymore. Not really. He becomes a footnote, a tragic anecdote, a warning taught in quiet corners of history classes. But you, having walked beside him, having heard his trembling voice, and seen the weight he carried, know he was more than that. He wasn't evil. He wasn't stupid. He was a product, symptom, final gasp of a bloodline that clung too tightly to power and paid for it with human suffering. And strangely, after all he endured, after all the humiliation, there's one small mercy in the end. Charles never saw the war his death caused, never saw the continent bleed in his name, never saw his own empire crumble further under the weight of competing dynasties, never saw how quickly his name was erased from memory. You pass through the royal archive one last time and find a forgotten letter tucked behind a loose board, written in a shaking, spidery hand. I hope I did not make things worse, it says. I tried to be good. I tried to be king. There's no signature. But you don't need one. The Habsburg line in Spain ended with Charles. But the lessons, those remain. About ambition, about blood, about the cost of turning a man into a myth and a child into a crown. And as the dust of war begins to settle, one thing is clear. Charles II didn't break the empire. He was just the final crack in a dam that had been leaking for centuries. You find yourself wandering the echoing halls of El Escorial once more, the sunlight dim and reverent, slipping through stained glass and dust motes that hang like tiny stars. Here lies Charles II, El Hechizado, the bewitched king, a man whose life was a slow-motion tragedy wrapped in velvet and superstition. It's easy to forget, amid the grand tapestries and cold marble, that this was once a living, breathing human. Not a puppet, not a symbol, but someone who endured a world that didn't know how to help him. You think back on everything you've seen, the misshapen jaw, the trembling hands, the vacant eyes, the whispered curses and exorcisms, the failed marriages and whispered rumors of witchcraft, the slow decline into isolation and suffering. A king who could neither rule nor father an heir, trapped by his own body and his family's relentless inbreeding. It's a story that makes you tired just hearing it, but also quietly grateful. Because you probably wouldn't survive this. And yet, somehow Charles did. For 38 long, difficult years. The curse of Charles II was, in many ways, the curse of Spain itself, kingdom wrestling with decline, haunted by its own past glories and the heavy cost of holding on too tightly. The Habsburg jaw was more than a physical deformity. It was a metaphor for a dynasty bent under the weight of its own secrets. As the centuries pass, historians continue to argue over what truly doomed Charles and his empire. Was it genetics? Was it politics? Was it a divine punishment? Or simply the tragic outcome of a family that ignored biology for ambition? But here, in this quiet sanctuary of stone and shadow, the noise fades. It's the endless wars, the court intrigues, the fevered prayers for heirs and miracles. You sit down on a cold bench, your breath visible in the chill. Outside, the wind rustles the cypress trees. You close your eyes and imagine Charles, no longer a king, no longer a myth bud, a boy who just wanted to be loved, to be normal, to live. And maybe, just maybe, in that fleeting moment, he finds peace. So, before you drift off tonight, remember this. History isn't just about the great and the powerful. Sometimes it's about the broken, the lost, and the quietly forgotten. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Now dim the lights even more. Tuck yourself in tight. Maybe turn on that fan for the softest hum and let the quiet wash over you. Sleep well, friend. Sweet dreams.